wasn't mentioned as opposed to any sexual misconduct?
There was no reference to sexual misconduct with minors.
We've heard from others that paedophilia has been understood by some in the church as sexual activity with prepubescent children, but not adolescent children. What do you say to that?
Yeah, that wasn't a factor in my thinking.
But are you aware of the discussion about the appropriate use of the word paedophilia?
Yes, I am.
And it's not unknown, of course, for priests to have engaged in sexual activity with adolescent boys, is it?
That's correct.
Yeah. And when you say the other consultant refers to the bishop referring to homosexual activity, many in the church would see homosexual activity as including sexual activity with adolescents who have not come of age, wouldn't they?
I don't think people would. That's a theoretical possible classification, but in these sorts of discussions, I don't think that distinction would have been made.
When you say you don't think the distinction would have been made, would there not in the church, to your knowledge, a somewhat different view taken of a homosexual relationship with a post-adolescent but nevertheless minor, as opposed to abuse of a prepubescent child?
Yes, there is. I think the literature clearly distinguishes that.
Yeah.
And there is a recognition in the church among some writers and speakers of that distinction.
Now, to your knowledge, there are many priests who have engaged in sexual activity, aren't there?
Too many.
If a priest engages in sexual activity, it doesn't follow, as a matter of course, that it's necessary to move them, does it?
No, not necessarily. But if there was, say, a long-term adult relationship or a source of what we might describe temptation, that would be a reason to shift a person.
Well, another reason to shift a person is if the sexual activity becomes a matter of public scandal. Correct?
That is correct.
Now, are we to understand that what you, at the very least, knew was that Ridsdale's sexual activity had become a matter of public scandal, making it necessary to move him?
No, I did not know that, because I did not know that the issue was his pedophilia activities or underage sexual activity.
I didn't ask you a question.
Activity with underage people.
I didn't ask you a question in those terms. I just asked you generally. For it to become necessary to move a priest who has engaged in sexual activity, the fact that the sexual activity, be it with adults or otherwise, has become a matter of public scandal is what would make it necessary to move them. Is that not so?
That is one reason for such a move.
Right. And when we're looking at the minute, as you've been doing with Ms. Vaness, and the Bishop advises that it's become necessary for Ridsdale to move from the parish, plainly, one of the likely reasons for him being moved is that his activities have become a matter of public scandal. Correct?
That is correct.
And the nature of that public scandal would, of course, be of real interest to you as a consultant, wouldn't it?
Yes.
You would want to know. You would want. Sorry.
Well, I don't think there's any reference there to a public scandal.
I know.
Obviously, that is one such possibility. It was actually the situation, but the bishop did not speak explicitly of a public scandal.
No, but
It could have been. It could have been personal moral reasons, other personal reasons why Ridsdale had to be shifted.
Well, there might have been, but as we've discussed, you and I, one of the real possibilities was that his activity had become a matter of public scandal, wasn't it?
That is one possibility amongst a number.
Yeah. And you, as a responsible consultant, would want to know, you would be very concerned to know whether or not the reason was because Ridsdale's activities had become a matter of public scandal, wouldn't you?
I would have been much more. It would have been important to know whether the public scandal touched on underage sexual activity, or the public scandal was of another nature, say drinking or quarrelling or adult sexual activity.
Well, whatever it was, public scandal brings real problems for the church, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And you, again, as a consultant exercising your responsibilities, would want to know what the situation was so that you could contribute to resolving it in a way which did not increase the damage to the church, wouldn't you?
Yes, but as always, the lead was given by the bishop, and the presumption was that the bishop was basically telling the truth. And I had no reason to think that behind these presenting reasons there was a different world of reality.
Well, as you told Ms Finesse, you actually don't have any recollection of what the bishop said at this meeting, do you?
No, but I do know the basis on which I thought, and I do know the basis on which he should have proceeded.
I'll leave Ms Finesse to take that up if she wants to.
I think where we're up to, Cardinal, is that you don't have any recollection of what was said at the meeting, although you have a recollection of what was not said. Is that fair?
I have studied the minutes of this meeting that took place over 30 years ago, and in the light of those minutes, I am quite happy to accept them.
That was not my question. I'll repeat it, Cardinal. You do not have any recollection of what was said at the meeting, although you have a recollection of what was not said. Is that right?
I wonder whether that is misleading. In the independent of the minutes, I do know the basis on which we proceeded, and that was that when a priest could be shifted for non-criminal activities and the reasons would not necessarily be given. The clear expectation was if there was criminal activity, that would be mentioned. Now, it could be that the consultants would decide to give another chance, but as, for example, in Day's case, his moral failures were explicitly mentioned to the consultants. I would have expected that exactly the same thing would be provided to us as was given to the consultants about John Day.
Is that the end of your answer, Cardinal?
Yes, but I'm happy to try to explain it any further if you would. Something is unclear.
You said in your answer that the clear expectation was if there was criminal activity, that would be mentioned. Now, what was the basis of that clear expectation? Where did you get that clear expectation from, Cardinal?
From my experience, from my general way of thinking, and such a conclusion is justified from the minutes of the Ballarat consultants.
The clear expectation that you refer to can only be properly held if there had been a discussion about criminal activity and that was mentioned at a consultants meeting in respect of someone. That follows.
No, I don't think that. I think there are a number of reasons why it could properly be held, and I've outlined my reasons.
Well, Cardinal, you've said that the clear expectation was if there was criminal activity, that would be mentioned. There must be a basis for you to have held that expectation and held it clearly that criminal activity would be mentioned. It must have been discussed at some stage.
No, there's no such conclusion necessary at all. We're talking about shifting priests from one position of responsibility to another. It's a common sense conclusion that if there was a record of criminal activity, it's totally reasonable to expect that that would be mentioned so that other people would not be put into danger.
So I take it you've been at a consultants meeting where it has been mentioned that there is a record of criminal activity.
I don't think that was ever the case in Ballarat.
Well, if that's the case, how can you have had a clear expectation that criminal activity would be mentioned if it had never happened?
I've already explained that 2 or 3 times.
Cardinal, by the time of this meeting, of course, the Bishop and other consultants knew that Ridsdale had been engaging in criminal activity, didn't they?
Some consultants certainly did.
I take it
as well as Malkearns.
I take it follows from what you told Ms Finesse that you would have expected as a matter of course that you would have been told about those criminal activities.
I certainly do.
Right. And given that you have no recollection of what actually happened at the meeting, is it reasonable for us to assume that you were told?
No, to completely, that's certainly not my evidence. There was no reference to pedophilia at any of the meetings of the Ballarat consultants that I attended, that a priest had committed that and people wanted to shift him to another parish.
What about offending against children or abusing children? You say that wasn't mentioned.
That I certainly do.
But again, we are to understand you actually have no recollection of the meeting and what was said.
No, I think that is an overstatement. I think I'm quite happy to accept the minutes of the meeting. And I don't think that's at all unreasonable about something that occurred over 30 years ago.
Of course, in minutes of this nature, given the sensitivity of the subject matter, it would not be uncommon for gentle and somewhat euphemistic language to be used, would it? No?
And that gentle and euphemistic language that you described was regularly used by Bishop Malkearns on these occasions, so that some of us were kept in the dark.
Well, it's open to assume that the language in the minutes is speaking euphemistically, isn't it?
I'm not aware of any evidence that suggests the minutes are misleading.
No, but they may not tell all. Perhaps?
That's the case with all minutes.
Yeah.
Now, you said earlier in an answer to a question, Cardinal, that, for example, in Day's case, his moral failures were explicitly mentioned to the consultors. Now,
I believe that's in the minutes. I believe so.
well, the minutes in relation to Day referred to the reasons for the resignation being given, and I will tell you the tab in Day's minutes.
Good.
Perhaps we can... While that's coming up, Cardinal, you continued to say, I would have expected that exactly the same thing would be provided to us as was given to the consultants about Day.
Let us see what was said with Day, but my basic position is the common sense one that if there was criminal activity, repeated criminal activity, that would be mentioned, and obviously that would be a reason why the people would refuse to go along with the appointment.
So in relation to Day, which is in the Day Tender Bundle, tab 36, and these are the minutes of the meeting in 1972, can someone provide that to you? Do you have that, Cardinal?
I did.
Now, it says that His Lordship outlined the circumstances which have led to the resignation of Monsignor J. Day from the parish of Mildura. Now, do you see that?
I do, yes.
And you gave evidence earlier that you would have expected that exactly the same thing would be provided to us as was given to the consultants about Day. Now, you accepted yesterday that from the evidence, the circumstances which had led to his resignation were in relation to a police investigation of serious sexual assault, and that information was provided to the consultants.
That's what I concluded from these minutes.
Now, the minutes in relation to Ridsdale leaving Mortlake are not dissimilar, are they? They are, it has become necessary to move Ridsdale out of Mortlake. Now, that, I suggest, implies that the necessity was the subject of reasons. Doesn't that follow?
It does, but in one case, these minutes say with Day that the Bishop outlined the circumstances that certainly did not happen with Ridsdale shifting.
So you're suggesting, are you, that unless
the necessity was mentioned, outlined.
I'm sorry, Cardinal?
In one case, the minutes say that His Lordship outlined the circumstances which led me to conclude they're talking about the police investigation, whereas on the other one it is simply said that it's become necessary to shift him.
But you know, don't you, that what Monsignor Fiscalini, Nolan and Bishop Mulkearns knew before that meeting was that he had to get out of Mortlake because of the stream of complaints of sexual abuse against him. We know now, don't we?
I do know now that they knew that.
But they knew that then, didn't they?
Yes, and I didn't.
Well, the fact that they knew it then suggests, doesn't it, that similar to Day, that information was the subject of the reason that it became necessary to move him. You accept that, don't you?
Could you repeat that, please?
Certainly. You accept from what Fiscalini, Nolan and Mulkerns knew that in their minds it was necessary to move him because of the complaints of sexual assault against him. Now, you accept that?
I do.
And
I do.
in relation to Day, the bishop provided the circumstances of his resignation because that information was available to him. That is, the police investigation. That's right?
Yes, it says there clearly he outlined the circumstances, and I presume that would have been done accurately.
And in relation to the Mortlake minutes, the bishop knew why it had become necessary to have Ridsdale leave Mortlake, and it follows, doesn't it, that he told those there what those reasons were?
It doesn't follow at all, and it's quite compatible with his other practices, and that he just said that it was necessary, and he never mentioned that it was necessary because of any criminal activity.
So are you saying that if the words in the minutes were outlined the reasons for the necessity to move, then you would accept that he had told the consultants present? Is that how we're to understand it?
No, I would not. I would not say that, because I was present at that meeting, and if that had been the case, criminal activity had been mentioned, I would certainly have remembered it.
If I can just come back to the criminal activity, Cardinal, can I ask you again, what is the basis for your clear expectation that criminal activity would be raised?
Because of the danger that such criminal activity presented to children. At that stage, while there might not have been the sensitivity to the problem there is now, it was clearly abhorrent.
Well, that's the reason.
Recognise.
I'm sorry, Cardinal.
No, I think I'm happy to wait for the next question.
What you answered was the reason why criminal activity would be raised, but not the basis upon which you had a clear expectation that it would be.
Well, I could just try to repeat what I've said 2 or 3 times, and that is that I believe that that is a common sense expectation, and the basis on which we've always moved in the church. We do not propose to ship priests, promote them when it's been shown they've